Hey, so this is the second video in the series on the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism, and I think this is kind of funny. I'm filming this right after the first video, so I think I'm doing first two videos, and then I'll wait a day or two and do the second two. So it'll be a nice scene change from this rainy day, but but yeah, the second noble truth is builds upon the first noble truth. That first noble truth says that there is suffering, and that suffering is a part of life. The second noble truth describes the cause of suffering and the origin of suffering in a person's experience. And on a very basic level, the cause of suffering is attachment. And what attachment is can be very simple or very complicated, depending on how you want to talk about it. On a very simple level, it can be seen as things, objects that we attach ourselves to. That we say, I have this umbrella in my hand. I can say this is my umbrella, and if somebody takes it away from me, that would cause me to suffer because that's my umbrella that they took. But the absence of this cause would happen if I say nothing about the umbrella. I make no declaration about it. And if I did make a declaration, I would say this is an umbrella that is in my hand. And I'm not attached to the umbrella, though I guess I am attached to my hand because I'm saying it's mine. But if somebody takes the umbrella, I wouldn't really care because I simply see it as an umbrella and not as my possession. And these attachments occur throughout our lives where, as people that live, assuming you live in a house or something equivalent, you see that house as yours. And you see it as your place that you live. And so anything that happens to that place becomes something that happens to you. And that's one of the basic forms of attachment called the translation of the term, at least, is the view of self. And what Buddhism talks about is the view of no self, saying that nothing is yours. And that gets into the way that you can essentially move beyond this quality described by the second noble truth, and no longer form attachments to objects. But yeah, I could go in one direction with this and get more into the details of the not self. And I guess I'll just make a note of this. So the idea of not self is one of three characteristics. The other two are impermanence and suffering, which the first noble truth is slightly different than the characteristic of suffering. So I'm not gonna get into the three characteristics in these. Maybe another series. But yeah. So getting back to the noble truth, the formation of attachments is what leads to suffering, and I have kind of a I have a way to explain this that I thought of. So the idea of physical attachments, things that objects that you own, or you think you own, at least, like you perceive that they're yours, are the very worldly type of attachment. But really what meditation deals with is the internal mental attachments that we have. And so you can think of it, the idea of trauma. And I think, it's a kind of a difficult subject in some ways because it's like it's just the source of suffering in so many people's lives is the traumatic memories. But what I'll describe is it doesn't even have to be a highly traumatic event. It can be something that's very simple. It basically takes the form of a slightly unpleasant memory. So you can think of something that happens when you're young, where Yeah, this is a good example. So you eat, I don't know how this would happen exactly. Your parent slices a lime or a lemon and leaves it out on the table, and you take a bite of it as a kid, and it's horribly sour, and you spit it out, and that causes a memory in your mind of eating this sour fruit, so that later in your life you see an orange sliced on a table, and you, even though you know it's an orange and it's not going to be sour, because it looks so similar, it triggers a memory in your mind that causes you to not eat it or to fear that it's going to be sour. And so this fear that you have afterwards is essentially a suffering that occurs in your present life based on an attachment that is formed in the past and is carried over from the past to the future, or to the present. And this, if we really break down the mental process that's happening during this, you can see it as starting with an experience, and kind of a tenet of Buddhism. I shouldn't say that too lightly, but a very common theme in Buddhism is that the experiences we have no absolute nature to them. They're not inherently pleasant or unpleasant. And so eating a sour piece of fruit isn't inherently unpleasant, but because of the way our mind works, when we taste something sour, it causes pain in our mind. And so after having that experience of eating the sour fruit, your mind generates suffering in the moment. But in addition to that, it causes the formation of an attachment. And this is basically a survival mechanism where in the future, if you see a similar fruit, if that original fruit had been poisonous and you narrowly escaped death, it makes sense for your mind to avoid any fruit like that in the future. And this formation of attachment, even though it is something that which would have kept us alive in, in the past, in our evolutionary past, in the present, it forms an attachment which causes suffering but doesn't actually protect us and isn't something that we actually need to hold on to. And so after the mind has formed this attachment that says fruit that looks like a lemon is dangerous, that attachment can become separated from the actual memory of eating the fruit to the point where when later in your life you walk up to a table that has an orange on it, your mind has that attachment, but may have completely forgotten the memory. And so seeing that orange, you feel the result of the attachment, you feel the fear and the pain of it, but you don't realize that it's coming from that memory. And so you might interpret it as, wow, I just don't like oranges, or oranges are gross, or this thing or that thing about the present moment. Even though the cause of the whole reason you feel the need to judge things and see things a certain way is not because of the present moment, but because of something that has happened in the past and that you're holding on to, even though you don't know what it is that you're holding on to. And so through the meditative path and the various techniques that Buddhism has, you can release these attachments and yeah, just reduce the suffering that you feel. And the important too is that you reduce the number of attachments that you have to things that you don't actually understand, and that you no longer remember the source of that attachment. And so it's not even not necessarily a matter of finding the causes of all of these attachments, but the noble truth refers to the process of recognizing that attachment itself is the cause of suffering. And that no matter what it is that caused you to feel this way about whatever it is, maybe it's oranges, maybe it's, who knows what, I don't want to talk about things maybe too close to home for people, I don't know. But whatever it is that causes you suffering when you experience it in the present, whether or not it's caused by something specific in the past, maybe something that someone said to you or something that happened to you, just understanding that linking the past to the present is a process which leads to suffering and does not lead to the liberation that Buddhism leads towards. And so you can simply let go of these attachments without needing to fully understand their origin and their root. And you can essentially use the Noble Truth as a tool to more or less gather your attachments into a group of things which are all labeled as attachments. And from there, yeah, I guess from there, learn how to view them more clearly. I don't want to say get rid of them because it's not. It gets into yeah, I guess into the kind of like the application of noble truths where you want to be careful not to over apply these things, which yeah, I think it's probably a good topic to add in this video is that the overall path that you follow in this is a path towards the decreasing of suffering in your life. And if concentrating too much on the noble truths actually causes you more suffering, then it kind of defeats the purpose of them, and is actually just going to lead you away from the real goal of the noble truths. So I don't want to say that you should necessarily just blanket statement say that all attachments are bad and you should get rid of all attachments, because any sort of absolute statement like that is going to be flawed. So yeah, I don't necessarily mean to say that, but I do. I think it is still useful to understand the kind of the full application of this idea. That if you took the noble truths completely seriously and saw the world in terms of nothing but the noble truth, which arguably is what the Buddha, kind of the consciousness of the Buddha was, but that's obviously an interpretation. But you can see that through the complete application of these things, you would bring yourself into a state which recognizes all of your attachments as causing suffering and being something to get rid of. And it leads to the kind of the path of renunciation that the Buddhists would have lived back in the day, where you'd be driven to sell your house, sell all your belongings, and to leave your life behind and go become a monk. And well, that's kind of like the most direct interpretation of these things, is that the life lived in a house causes more suffering than it frees you from. That's not the life that I live, and because I am the one making these videos, I'm never gonna present that complete of a drive towards giving things up, I guess. Where my personal view is more moderate in this way, where even if I recognize that all my attachments could cause suffering, and that on some level they do cause suffering, I don't think it's necessary to immediately remove all your attachments and say that every attachment is bad. And this is much harder to explain because it essentially comes from my personal views of the world, which themselves are built upon attachments. But this is kind of how a viewer would apply this as well. It's not to just give up all of your views and replace them with the view that attachment causes suffering, but to kind of mesh that with the current views that you have about the world, and to maybe see more of your attachments as something to get rid of, but not to see all of them as some horrible thing that you need to remove. because yeah, if you're not a monk and you don't want to become a monk, just hating everything in your life, not hating, of course, but trying to remove everything from your life is just going to make you suffer more, and yeah, completely defeats the purpose of reducing your suffering through these practices. But all right, I've rambled a bit. This is the reason for doing a kind of a practice class, because in an actual class I would have to cut this out. But this is quality information for people who, well, I don't know, hopefully quality. If you care about the way I'm saying things as much as I care about them, I guess. If you take your things as literally as I do. But yeah, that's about it. My hand is getting tired from holding this umbrella. But yeah. The second noble truth, I'll just give a summary of, is saying that attachment is the source of suffering. And the example I described of eating a lemon and finding that it's very sour, and then later in your life, the attachment to that sourness causes you to avoid oranges, is describing a form of this noble truth where the experience of suffering leads to an attachment, and that attachment, separated from the original suffering, leads to further suffering in the future. And so in that way, suffering leads to attachment, and attachment leads to suffering. And it forms a sort of a cycle that, in the next noble truth, I'll describe the sort of the existence outside of the cycle. And in the final noble truth, the ways in which you can escape these sorts of cycles of suffering and attachment. And yeah, that's about it. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video of the Noble Truth series. Yeah.